and associated disorders, its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented on our site. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now I'm going to turn over the introductions of our speaker to Martha Butterfield, the webinar coordinator of NJCTS. Marty?
Thank you, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I would like to take a moment to remind anyone who has an idea that they would like their TS child to attend our second annual Tim Howard Leadership Academy that will be held in August at Rutgers University. The application deadline has been extended to January 30th, so you need to move quickly if you want your child to attend. The program is open to boys and girls who will be entering grades 9 through 12 this September. Also, registration is now open for our next New Jersey Walks for TS event, which is being held in Mercer County Park in East Windsor on Sunday, March 29th. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Joelle McGovern. Dr. McGovern received her doctorate in clinical, developmental, and school psychology from Bryn Mawr College. She is a clinical psychotherapist at the Child and Adolescent OCD, TIC, TRIC, and Anxiety Group in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. She specializes in working with children and teens affected by anxiety, trauma, tics, trichotillomania, and related disorders, in addition to several behavioral difficulties and autism spectrum disorders. Dr. McGovern also worked at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, helping children cope with chronic illness, trauma, bereavement, and feeding issues. Her clinical and research interests include therapy for children and adults with anxiety, OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder, tic disorders, trichotillomania, and autism spectrum disorders, as well as investigating treatment effectiveness. This is Dr. McGovern's third appearance on our webinar series. She previously presented in May of 2014 on treating OCD in young children, and prior to that, in October of 2011, she discussed kids and anxiety. Those webinars are available for download on our website. Dr. McGovern, welcome. We're delighted to have you back, and now, without further introduction, I'll turn tonight's presentation over to you.
Thank you, Marty, and welcome everybody. I wanted to start off just thanking Marty Butterfield and Kelly Tebow for all their hard work putting these webinars together. They're always very patient with me and my slides, and it's a great service for the community. And also New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome, just the whole organization is a fantastic organization, and we are glad here at Cottage that parents and teachers and kids have this kind of organization to refer to and to get help from. I also wanted to take a second to thank my colleague, Dr. Dingzelder. She had helped to create some of these slides because she was going to do the presentation, but unfortunately could not this evening. So I just wanted to credit her for helping creating some of the slide set. Tonight we're going to talk about creative ways that you can apply exposure therapy and habit reversal therapy for kids and adolescents. Oh, hold on, sorry, I'm trying to click. There we go. Sorry about that. And so I'm going to start with an overview of exposure and habit reversal therapies. Very, very brief. If you want to know more, there are lots of links on this webinar series in the archives about exposure therapy and habit reversal therapy, but in order to get into sort of the meat of how you can be creative with these therapies, I'm kind of just going to breeze through those, the overview a little bit. The second piece we're going to talk about is common challenges that are associated with these treatments. So these are hard treatments for kids. They're hard treatments for adults, and there are a lot of challenges. And some of those are helping people to understand the treatment, why they would want to do it, what's it about, how does it work. Part of it is motivational. So even if you know how it works and why you want to do it, sometimes it's still very hard to do, so building motivation. And then logistical barriers also. So just basic barriers that pop up, everyday stress, family dynamics, whatever may get in the day, in the way sort of with everyday living. And as I go through those challenges, I'm also going to talk about some creative ways to help overcome those challenges. So the first piece we're going to talk about is exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is pretty easy. The idea is if you're anxious about something and you do it over and over and over again, you will no longer be anxious about it. You may be a little anxious about it, but not enough for it to get in your way. So anyone who's ever done anything that they're afraid of knows this. Facing your fears is a big thing. So if you're afraid of public speaking and you do it a lot, you're going to become less afraid of it. Will you still be nervous? Sure, but you'll be less afraid and you'll be less nervous and you'll be better able to function. So exposure therapy is really looking at what's getting in your way, doing exposure to those fears that are getting in your way, and within that exposure, you learn that your fear is unrealistic or it's exaggerated, or on the off chance that your fear does come true, that you'll be able to manage it, that you'll be able to handle it. And you do this by gradually confronting the different kinds of activities or things that you're anxious about. And there are a couple different ways to do this. In vivo within real life, so you can see the boy touching the tarantula. So, you know, doing the thing live until it doesn't make you nervous anymore. Imaginal exposure is actually just imagining, creating a storyline about whatever it is you're anxious about. This is very useful for things that you may not be able to do, like people who might be afraid to go on planes or trains or something that would be difficult to do. It's also helpful for people who are too anxious to do the live exposures. So you may do an exposure about touching a spider that's imaginal first, and then move into live exposures. And then interoceptive exposure is specifically for issues around anxiety pertaining to panic sensation. And so a lot of times when people panic, it becomes sort of the fear of the fear, and they actually end up just being afraid of those sensations. So actually exposing kids to those sensations to normalize them, and so every time their heart beats fast, they don't cascade into a panic attack. As far as habit reversal, and that is used for tics and trichotillomania goes, it is a set of techniques that you use that will help kids to realize when and where they pull or when or where they tic, and basically building their awareness of when that happens and any kind of premonitory urge that they might have, and then putting in some ways to minimize the triggers for them, as well as some competing responses for them when they have the urge, so that they can resist the ticking or the pulling, which will then decrease the urge overall. So why focus on this? There are lots of pieces that you can do when you're thinking about helping a child. Everyone knows the relaxation pieces: help your kid breathe deep, help your kid take a break, you know, give them strategies to kind of relax their body, relax their mind. A lot of people are very well versed in thoughts, alternative thoughts. So if you're thinking negatively, how can you turn that thought around? How else can you think about it? People know about facing fears. It's out there. But when you have a child that's really scared, and or a child that has this urge to tic or to pull, it's really hard to help them face the fear or resist the ticking and the pulling. And so for some kids, you can do the cognitive pieces and the relaxation pieces, and they might then naturally start to do exposures because they're calm enough to do them. Or you can do some of the habit reversal training around building awareness and finding triggers and minimizing triggers. But even those kids sometimes still have stronger premonitory urges, and it's harder for them to resist the pulling or the ticking. And the reason why it's important is that you can see on the bottom right where you have avoidance rituals and tics and pulling. Those things go back and sort of strengthen the internal triggers that kids feel and the anxious thoughts and the urges. So if you can pull that piece out of the equation, it breaks that cycle, and then it weakens that association between the thought and the anxiety, or the association between the urge and wanting to pull, or the association between the thought and needing to do a ritual, whatever it might be. You're weakening it because now kids are learning how to confront it, tolerate the distress, don't do the thing that their anxiety or their urge is urging them to do, which then will help break that association for them. So that's why in this presentation we're really focusing on the idea of exposure and habit reversal. It's not to say those other pieces are not important, it's just that exposure and habit reversal, especially sort of using competing responses in the face of urges, those are the pieces that seem the most crucial for kids to get better. I wanted to put in this slide just to think a little bit about the different diagnoses and the similarities and differences between them. So you've got anxiety, OCD, tics, trichotillomania. And one similarity between all of those pieces is there's sort of an avoidance and a, well, it's not sort of, there actually is an avoidance and a compulsivity piece to those. And why they avoid and why they're compulsive is to alleviate discomfort and alleviate anxiety. So the premonitory urge you get before you tic is very uncomfortable. It might be a tension, it may be feeling your stomach, whatever it is, it's uncomfortable. A lot of kids with trick get sort of an itchiness or a tension before they pull. And then if you have anxiety, most people know what that feeling feels like, to feel anxious. And same with OCD, because when you have the anxiety, the obsessive thought, it leads to anxiety. So the compulsions and the avoidance are an attempt to alleviate discomfort, alleviate anxiety. Over time, they may look more impulsive. So kids who have been ticking for a long time or pulling for a long time or doing rituals a long time actually often do them without even thinking about them anymore. So it's not even like they're anxious first, they just do them. They're in the habit of having someone open the door for them instead of them opening the door. Trichotillomania has both that piece as well as an impulsivity piece. So there's some gratification sometimes that comes with the hair pulling. Sometimes it's the size of the root that came out. Sometimes it's what they do with the hair afterwards. Rolling it in the finger might feel good, pulling the root off. Some kids like to do that. Some kids like to bite the hair. Some kids eat the hair. And a lot of kids derive pleasure from those components. So there's not only the compulsivity and the avoidance piece. With trick, there's a little bit less in the way of avoidance, but there could be a secondary. Kids learn if they pull, they don't need to do something. And so sometimes there's sort of the secondary gain, and it kind of gets people off their back if they start to pull. So there's that piece that's in there a little bit. But you've also got this sort of movement towards for pleasure. What they all have is a difficulty to inhibit or delay behaviors. And you can see movement between compulsions, avoidance, impulsivity. You can kind of see movements across and between different diagnoses. The most important thing is that the response to the compulsive and impulsive thoughts and urges is the most important factor in maintaining and worsening symptoms. So again, that's why we're working on looking at the HRT and looking at the exposure. Just to think about when treatment is happening and when people are carrying over the treatment and when kids are working on these things at school and at home, there are some things that you want to make sure that you focus on to make the therapy carry over, be very productive for the child, and still feel good for the child as well. You want it to be voluntary. The kids need to be on the board. The kids need to want to do it. If they don't want to do it, actually, usually the term I use with them is, are they willing to do it? Because no one really wants to do it because it's hard. But a lot of them are willing to do it because of what they'll gain in the long run. So you really need them to be willing and on board. Otherwise, it ends up being either a huge conflict, which creates issues in and of itself, or they end up feeling ashamed about things because there's lots of focus on the different disorders, but they're not quite ready to figure out how to manage them yet, or they're not ready to be able to do that piece. The other piece is collaborative. That goes along with voluntary. And collaboration across systems is really a good thing because mixed messages are very confusing to kids, especially, again, they're looking for that message of, can I avoid and or can I give in to my urge? And so it's hard for them you know, if one person is saying, oh no, just relax, and if you still can't do it, no big deal, and somebody else is saying, well, no, you really want to work to confront this, that's a hard thing for kids to kind of navigate. Hierarchy driven, so no throwing trials.
But
I'm sorry. So no, is that better?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I didn't know if you were talking to me. You want my volume up?
You had turned away from the speakerphone, so you had faded for Marty.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So hierarchy driven, you're not going to take a child and throw who's afraid of the water and throw them into the deep end of the pool. You know, you want to start small, dipping their toes in, maybe standing up to their knees, maybe splashing something water on their face, whatever it is that they're ready to do. So you always want to move sort of in a stepwise fashion so that they're not overwhelmed, so that they're feeling anxious and they're confronting, but they're not overwhelmed. Focusing on accomplishments and failures, these kids are really trying. They are really trying. But sometimes they can't. They can't resist that urge. They can't resist the pull. Or sometimes with the tics and the pulling, sometimes they don't even know they're doing it. It's just happening. So it's hard to know, it's hard to resist something if you are not aware it's happening at the moment. You know, the kids with anxiety, same things. They don't want to not go to school. They would love to go to school, but it's really just hard. They just can't sometimes. So just knowing that if there are things that don't work, then you got to go back to how can we motivate, how can we help you deal with this, what can we do to help you move forward, and just focus on, you know, the small steps they are making. The idea that you promote mastery, both of anxiety and of sort of the urges, managing the urges is important. So it's not about getting rid of those things, it's really about managing them. When you manage them, what happens is they sort of fall away on their own. Some more than others. It depends on the child. So sometimes the urge disappears. Sometimes the urge is there a little bit. Sometimes the urge is there more, but they can now at least tolerate it. So it kind of depends. But really it's about managing what comes at you versus trying to get rid of it. And then for both things, you want to base it on behavior. So you want to look at, like you have them do an assessment of when, where, and how everything is happening to help you figure out how to approach it and what to put in place to help. The last piece I have in here is more to do with tics and trick, which is creating a tic and trick neutral environment. So the idea is if you have someone in a classroom who is sneezing or who is coughing, no one's paying attention to that and telling that person to stop. Even, you know, the kids just tapping their pencil or tapping their foot. Most of the times people are just letting that noise go. And so you want to sort of create the same neutral environment for the hair pulling and the tics, because otherwise what happens is if there's an intense sort of reaction or lots of focus on tics or trick, it usually exacerbates it and makes it worse. The only time attention needs to be given to it is when the child's on board and says, okay, can you help me learn about where I do it and when I do it, or can you help me, give me a cue to stop? So that's important. Treat it like a sneeze. Treat it like, you know, someone's sort of biting their nails, right, for the tics, I mean for the trick. And just kind of go through your day and live your life and let them have that environment to be pretty neutral for them too. So what you want them to learn from all of the work that you're going to do to help them face their fears or resist their urges, you want them to know that the anxiety and the urges are transient. They don't feel that way. They feel like they're going to last forever. But they are transient, and as they do the work, they will learn that. You also want them to get the idea that any kind of avoidance or pulling or tics strengthens the fear and or urge, depending on what you're talking about, which part you're talking about. And any kind of exposure for the anxiety piece or resistance to the urges for the tics and trick weakens it. That's not to make them feel badly about if they have it, and if they have avoided in the past, it's fine. It's totally natural to give in to urges, and it's totally natural to avoid things you're scared of. But now that they're learning about what strengthens and weakens it, you want them to really get this concept of, okay, I need to go ahead and feel uncomfortable in the moment so I can get better in the long run. The initial thought, feeling, and urge, that just needs to be accepted. It's just there. No one's making that happen. It just kind of happens. They really can't control that piece. It's the response that they want to be focused on. How am I going to respond to this thought or this urge? What am I going to do to help weaken this association so I can get back to functioning? The fact that being uncomfortable is not a bad thing. So mostly the tics, the pulling, and the, a lot of times the tics, the pulling, and the avoidance or the rituals are to get rid of that immediate discomfort. So what you want them to do is wrap their head around, okay, I'm going to let myself be uncomfortable because that will let me be comfortable later. It will help decrease the urge or decrease the worry in the long run. Even though I'm not even working on it, it will just do that because of habituation. And so having them look at that short-term discomfort when they're facing their fears or they're resisting an urge as a good thing is important. The fact that they can do it, they can manage it, and that's why you break it into steps. So you gradually get that confidence up that they can do it, and you make it manageable for them. And the idea that you go about your business no matter what's going on. So if the ceiling fan is going and the noise is bothering you and you're really paying attention to how much it's bothering you, it's going to continue to bother you. If instead you turn your attention to whatever you're working on at your desk, or if you're playing or whatever you're doing, then all of a sudden that ceiling fan noise starts to disappear, even though it doesn't. It's still the same, but you've turned your attention away from it. And that's sort of what you need to do with the worry thoughts as well as the urges. The other thing is when they're thinking about exposures is that anticipation of the exposure is usually higher for a lot of people than it is when you actually do the exposure. That's not always true, but that's sometimes true. So it's good for kids to know their pattern of anxiety. So taking context and setting into consideration, you want to work together as much as possible for everyone to kind of join and empathize with the child. Everyone assume they're doing the best they can in that moment and really connect with them on how hard it is for them. Collaborate with each other and with the child. Guiding the child, yet letting the child kind of lead you. So you're still their sort of support and their guide, but they're leading you with where they're ready to go and what they're ready to do. Again, that tic and trick neutral environment is important. And just everybody being on board as being part of a team and working together. For teachers specifically, prior to getting help, and depending on what type of help you're getting, it may be helpful, it may not. If you're not doing exposure therapy and if you're not doing response prevention for OCD, and if you're not working on competing responses and you're just sort of talking, often you're not going to see much in the way of change in symptoms. But if you are putting those things in place, then you will. So with teachers, if the kids don't have anything in place yet, and or the therapy is not effective for that child, you want to help minimize social embarrassment and stigma. You want to model that tic neutral and trick neutral environment for those kids. You know, for kids who are doing rituals, you want to do whatever you can do. You might need to put accommodations into place to help them decrease the rituals in school. Now that's not great, and accommodation is usually like a ritual somebody else does for you, but if the child doesn't have anything in place right now therapeutically that's helping, blocking, you know, making them do the thing that's hard for them to do isn't going to work at that point, and it's just going to be really disruptive. There's going to be a lot of conflict, and there's going to be a lot of stigma that comes with that. So thinking about that piece, and then moving into, as the kids have some help, and or if the kids come to you and say, I want you to help me with this, can you kind of challenge me with this and that, or can you cue me if I'm ticking or if I'm pulling my hair so I can remember to stop. If they come for help, then that's great, then absolutely go with that and go with their lead. As well as teachers are really great at general concepts. So things like perfectionism and making mistakes. Lots of teachers these days are talking to kids about how it's good to make mistakes and how mistakes that's how you learn. And so, and that everybody has sort of habits and everybody has some urges and they have to think about which ones to respond to and which ones not to. And so this is a good sort of general teaching that teachers can often work into whatever they're teaching about if that material seems to fit or if there's a way to fit it in. With the parents, probably the most important thing is sort of connecting and empathizing with the child, really making sure the child is heard, making sure you know how hard it is for the child and they know that you know how hard it is, even though it might not seem like it should be so hard to you, and try to find something to relate to that. You know, if you're afraid of roller coasters, imagine someone saying, okay, we're going to practice going on roller coasters. Or if you're afraid of tarantulas, imagine someone saying, okay, well, we're going to practice holding tarantulas. And you can kind of get that sense of dread and that sense of fear, and it helps you tap into what they're feeling. The same thing with any kind of urges, right? So I always give parents examples. I love potato chips. So if I had 2 bags of potato chips glued to my hands, my day would be really hard. It would be really hard for me not to eat those potato chips. But lucky for me, they're not part of my body, and I can just not buy them and just not have them in sight. But with your hair for a trick and your body for ticks, you don't have a choice. The thing that you're having an urge about is on you. It's part of you. And so it's really, really hard to constantly avoid or resist those urges. The other thing is just helping the child follow through on daily therapy practices, because they will have, the more they practice, the quicker they will feel better. So being able to support a child through all of this work is important. So one of the challenges is just getting kids to understand. And so again, this might be nice for when parents are home and they're not sure what kids are, you know, they're trying to kind of connect with them about something, but the kids are not feeling like they can do whatever it is they need to do for their therapy homework. Helping them back up a little bit and think about why is it they're doing it is helpful. And again, sort of in general for teachers, these are just great concepts for kids to have. In general, they're just good living concepts. Everyone can use them. So for really young kids, a lot of times I use puppets, and we act out whatever we need to. We act out whatever we need to learn about that association between urges and pulling, or urges and ticking, or obsessive thoughts and rituals, or anxious thoughts and avoidance. So whatever we need to learn, we can act it out with puppets. We can act it out with pretend play characters. We can do it game show style. We can do it interview style. We can flip. The child can be the doctor. My puppet is the patient. Whatever way you can do it, so they can kind of get the idea, and then get the idea of treatment, and sort of bossing back that urge, or bossing back that that idea that you need to do a ritual, or that you need to avoid something, and doing it anyway. And how that makes it, if you do it over and over and over, it makes it sort of shrink and get smaller, and then it's easier to do those things, and you feel good because you get all those things back that you would have lost to anxiety. Or you can go through your day and it feels a little bit better because you've decreased the amount of your pulling, and now the urge feels a little bit less, and same with the tics. So those are good things to help kids get the idea of the treatment. Things like putting a piece of paper in a shoe, and it feels uncomfortable at first, but leaving it there. And again, discomfort goes across all of these disorders. So leaving the paper in the shoe and playing and walking and doing things, and then checking in every so often about how the paper feel. And a lot of times kids will be like, oh, I totally forgot it was in there. And so you can talk about the idea, the whole ceiling fan analogy, kind of not responding to that urge, not responding to that thought, and how if you just leave it in the background and do what you're doing, how it starts to sort of fade away on its own, even though it's still there, but you just don't notice it. You can do it the same thing with paper airplanes or paper balls. Have kids write their worries on there, and you can kind of, with the kids' permission, they usually like to do this. You can throw the paper balls at them, and they just kind of let them, they're playing, they're drawing, whatever, and they just let them bounce off. So they're not trying to stop them, because you can't really stop those thoughts, and you can't stop those urges. Those pieces are coming. The only way you can really decrease them is not responding to them. So for them to have an opportunity to be like, have these little paper balls bouncing off of them, and they're not responding, and they're still kind of playing and having fun and getting that idea. Bird on the shoulder, same thing. It could be, you know, chirping at you to pull. It could be chirping at you to tick, whatever it is, and just ignoring it and getting busy and using habit reversal techniques. The idea of a something or nothing box. So this is good with worries too. So you have a box that has something on it, a box that has nothing on it, and then you might write down worries on paper and play basketball and read them and say, oh, okay, that's a nothing worry. I don't have to respond to that. Or, oh, that's a something worry. I have to respond to that. And the idea is that your something box should be pretty small, and your nothing box should be pretty big. And typically in life, that's the way it is. People worry more than they need to about nothing. And so you want the big box to be nothing, right, I'm sorry, more than they need to about nothing. So you want your nothing box to be small because you really don't need to worry about it. I'm sorry if I messed that up. Excuse me. So the next 4 that I have here, I have sort of visuals of. So this is a metaphor, right? So this child happened to like Star Wars, which is great because at the end of the first Star Wars, Luke is going through that sort of little tunnel area. He's anxious. You know, he's got Darth Vader behind him. He's got Darth Vader's ships all around him. He has the Death Star ahead. And he's facing his fears. He's anxious, but he's doing it anyway. And he turns everything else off, and he uses the Force. So kids can interpret that Force as however they want. Their kind of inner strength it can be. It could be the fact that they know they have a support system, and that carries them through. It could be the habit reversal techniques. It could be the competing responses. It could be the bossing back. Whatever they want that Force to be, whatever makes sense to them. And then the idea is as Luke's going through, he's, of course, you know, blowing up on the little ships till he gets to the mothership, and then that explodes. And again, that's a really nice metaphor for your hierarchy. And sorry, I don't have any water with me. Hold on one second. Your hierarchy and kind of knocking things off little by little. But in the long run, what ends up happening is the whole ship is gone, that your anxiety is way down, you don't have the symptoms, you don't have as much urges, and you're able to kind of live your life. This is another visual way to kind of do some psychoeducation. So this is a nice way for kids to track what's going on. They can track their fears, they can track their inflexibility or their avoidance, they can track their urges, but it gives them this nice picture of, you know, what they took back when they were able to not respond to those thoughts or urges, what they did to help them, what they thought to help them, what their parents did to help them, and then looking at the urges across time and noticing how they decrease when you don't respond to them, or looking at the worry across time and noticing how it decreases when you don't respond to it. So this is just a nice kind of pictorial way to track data and also get the psychoeducation. Narrative storytelling is good, so helping kids sort of externalize. This is mainly around anxiety and externalizing the anxiety and telling a story about it. And this child named it a goblin, and it was scary, and it was really big at first. That's in the picture to the left. But then she decided what she didn't want to miss out on, and she kind of talked back to the goblin thought. She didn't feed it, and it shrunk, and she was able to stay where she was and have fun, even though there was a noise that she normally would have said, I need to leave, I need to avoid this place. And so you can see in the second picture how she felt. After that, it felt like that goblin thought kind of decreased for her a little bit. So narrative storytelling is good. Normalizing and inspire with kind of media. Anything that's out in the social media, out in the world is great. Ohio State football has been in the news a lot for this armband that they have, that their trainer had. They have a leadership trainer, and it's E plus R equals O, which is the event plus your response equals the outcome. And again, the idea is you can't change the event, but the way you respond to it will change your outcome. And that's great. That's out there right now. There are these bands you can buy online. You could make your own as something for a kid to do in session as you talk about the different ways you can respond. There's lots of great things you can do there. There are also lots of other people in the media that are talking pretty openly about different issues that they have. So you've got Tim Howard, who works very closely with New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome, who was the soccer goalie or football goalie, I guess if you want to say it the correct way, in the World Cup, and talking very openly about having Tourette syndrome and really helping with kids feel more confident that they can be someone, they can do something, they don't have to let this get in their way. It's just a tick. They're just ticking. Michael Jordan, cut from the high school basketball team, talks lots about failure and how it's not about failing, it's about responding by giving up versus responding by fighting harder. And so that's a great thing for kids to think about and to see. Howie Mandel, he's actually kind of an example of what not to do with OCD. So he talks very openly about having OCD. He really describes what it's like in a way that kids will really feel understood. but he has a lot of money, and he's able to kind of just do rituals and avoidance all the time. And that's more or less what he does. Now, he has said since he's been on TV more, he's gotten a little bit, it's gotten easier with him for contamination because he has to be around more people, so it sort of was an exposure for him. But sometimes I like to let kids watch that so they can tell me, like, well, what did Howie do there? Or that really is not helpful for him. And they can kind of pick that out and show me. Armbands, other thoughts on it besides E plus R equals O? Anxious thought plus response equals outcome. Discomfort plus response equals outcome. Urge and anxious feeling. So those are all the things you can't control, the things all the way to the left. Those just happen. It's the response to them that changes the outcome. The second challenge often is motivation. So kids often are not the ones who are asking for treatment. Sometimes they are, but often they are not. There's still a lot of stigma around any form of disorder, and so, you know, they don't want to come to treatment because they feel like kids will make fun of them, or then it feels like something's wrong with them, so there's a lot of resistance. Also, they might not recognize the need for it. You know, a lot of times when kids are young, people are kind of running around them, making sure everything is okay. People are doing the rituals for them, people are doing the accommodation for them, whatever it may be. You know, for tics and trick, often there's no social pressure because when you're young, nobody really cares. They're like, oh, you're pulling your hair? Yeah, okay. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I do this, I tick. Okay. So there's often not very much social judgment for the younger kids that you might see in the older kids. And so there's not, you know, why do I stop doing this? Because it's really uncomfortable to work on stopping doing this. So also kids live in the present, right? So if I can make myself feel better now, why should I let myself feel uncomfortable? And to think future thinking and long-term thinking, that if the discomfort in the short run helps you in the long run feel better, that's really hard for kids to wrap their heads around. Just so you know, at the end of the presentation, what I did is I took all the links to anything I had here as ideas, and I put them on a Pinterest page, and I put that link at the end. So you can go to that Pinterest link, and you'll find links to all of these ideas and strategies that I'm about to talk about. So therapy doesn't have to be boring. There are things you can do. You can do scavenger hunts for things like if child I'm working with has, and when I say therapy, I'm thinking also like carryover, right? So carryover at home, or carryover even at school. So scavenger hunts at home, if you have separation anxiety, you can do a scavenger hunt where dad goes somewhere and mom goes somewhere, and there are clues. They're in the house or wherever, or out back or wherever, but there are clues that lead the child to those parents. So it allows the child to be separate from the parents for a little bit with the idea that they're playing a game and they're going to find them. Something like that. Treasure hunts, things like OCD. So if you're doing OCD homework and you need to do an exposure and you have contamination fears, getting a trash can that's a clean trash can, you know, one with like office trash and papers and things like that, but having something hidden in the bottom of the trash can for them to find. And they'll do a treasure hunt, and it could be a toy, it could be a little trinket, it could be something to play with, whatever it would be, but the exposure of going through the trash can would be hard for them, and then they have this immediate reward of whatever it is they would find. I'm thinking also at school, when you have carryover with scavenger hunts, say a child has social anxiety. So something like doing something where a child has to go ask 2 or 3 people to get something that they need. But it needs to be in, like, again, a willing way, a game fashion, something that's fun for them and something that they want to do. It wouldn't be sort of a forced upon thing. And then go fish. So things like playing go fish and using feared stimulus, like it could be just general worries about spiders or elevators or something, anything that they look at that might get a needle, they might get afraid of. Or it could be more specific to OCD. It could be certain words that they can't say because if they say it, it will happen. So if I'm afraid of words like death, die, dying, because I'm afraid if I say them, somebody's going to die, then playing go fish game when you're asking, do you have any dead? No, I don't have any dead. Do you have any dead? No, go fish. go fish for some dead. So you're saying that word a lot and doing the exposure that way. Using sports as a way, kids who really love sports, you can put exposure-based work within the sports. Even things like kids who have social anxiety, maybe going to a big sport team and trying to join would be too hard, but maybe getting 2 neighborhood kids that can come over to play basketball. Or if you're on the recess playground with a child and you see they're off to the side, maybe helping them create a smaller group that feels more manageable, doing something they love to do, like playing basketball or football or something like that, and that will help them do an exposure around the social anxiety and being with people and playing with people and talking to people. Fortune tellers, I have a picture of the fortune teller down there. Those can be used for lots of things. So for ticks and tricks, this is nice because it keeps your hand busy. It automatically gives you a competing response. So a competing response would be something you do instead of pulling, something you do instead of ticking. So you're having the urge, and you feel it, or you know it, or maybe you started to do it, and that's how you noticed it, and you stop yourself and you put a competing response in place. So doing these fortune tellers, your fingers are busy. They're in, and you're doing it with someone that's a social thing, and it keeps your fingers busy, so now it's hard to pull, or depending on what the tick is, it might be hard to tick. At the same time, you can put worries in here that can be psychoeducational about like learning or coming up with good thoughts in response to worry thoughts, things like that, or it could be more geared towards OCD again, where you're talking about, you might open up something that has a word on it, maybe cigarette. So a lot of times if kids even see the word cigarette, they think somehow they got smoke in their mouth and something bad's going to happen. So you may have that kind of word or picture in the fortune telling. What you want is for kids, this to help the kids, the exposure to be more tolerable, and that way they'll be motivated. At the same time, you don't want them to be so distracted they don't feel the anxiety and or they don't feel some urge, because you really want them to learn how to manage those things. So if you're so distracted, you're not really learning how to manage them. And the second you pay attention to them again, they're going to kind of come flooding back for you. So you want to make sure that the game playing and the fun part of the exposures are still balanced with them tapping into and sort of feeling some urges and being able to resist, putting the competing response into place, or feeling the worry and not needing to do anything about it, just leaving it be there. This is an example of, for social anxiety, you can do Bravery Bingo, right? So lots of things that would be hard for kids to do. On this particular card, it might be a homework card. If teachers are on board and the kids on board at school and they want to do it at school, they could have it there, and they could have, the goals of what they're doing, and they could kind of check it off at school. Maybe the teacher could help them think of some things that they could and put in there, and then they could actually do. So the child might say to the teacher, oh, will you call on me for this answer, this question? I know this answer. So that's something they're willing to do, even though it's hard, and you can put that on the card, and you can try that. So there are lots of things that you can put on these cards to help kids. And then a lot of times if they fill up the card, or if you do a more traditional card where you can go diagonal, across, or vertical, then they can earn a reward for getting bingo or filling the card. More exposure games for feared images. So there are lots of ways to do this too. Puzzle with feared images on it. There's an app that you can upload any puzzle, and it makes whatever picture, and it makes a jigsaw puzzle out of it. So that's a great way. It breaks it all apart, and they gradually put it together. So that's a great sort of gradual exposure. Memory match with feared images is helpful. Again, you're just exposing to the image that they don't want to look at, or they don't want to see, or they don't want to say, in order to get them used to it. So it ends up pulling sort of all the power away from it. Pin something on something. So I just had, I work with a child that is anxious about turning into somebody else, which is a more common OCD fear than other people realize, because it's just not in the media there. So you can pin the child in the wherever, or on the wherever. So some kids won't sit on the couch that somebody else sat on, because they might turn into them. Or there's some kind of emotional contamination. Somehow they're going to get dirty or germy because somebody sat there. And so even doing the step where you're taking a picture and pinning the child onto the couch, even just looking at themselves on the couch is hard. So that's a step in the hierarchy. Any kind of slap it game where you're putting things down and you have to slap when you see a certain image, so you really have to attend to the images. Those are good. and any kind of hidden object game. So again, this is more for things like feared images or feared words, and you have to find that feared word or that feared image in the background of a whole bunch of other drawings. And so that is a good way, fun way to get at it as well. The other way to address motivation is by tapping an interest. So, you know, whatever kids like, use it. If they like Angry Birds, then you draw the pigs, and the pigs become what they're going to boss back or the urges they're not going to respond to. And then you draw the birds, and the birds are your strategies, and they're your support system, and they're your competing responses. And then as the kids kind of knock all of those off, you can redraw them, and you can knock down the pigs and have this one bird be victorious, then you move on to the next one. So ways to help motivate them by tapping their interests. Humor is good. I love this. This was, you know, more timely a couple of years ago, but there are lots of explanations for things. So one explanation about the buying calendar was the world was going to end. So using humor and seeing other ways to look at things is helpful for kids. Game and play as competing responses. So again, I have an urge to pull, I have an urge to tick. What am I going to put in place? Fidget toys. On the Pinterest page, I have a whole bunch of links to fidget toys. Anything that's attention absorbing. We used to think competing responses had to be not compatible, right? So if the tick was in the shoulder, you would need to do something. If it was moving your shoulder up, you would push down on a chair to kind of pull your shoulder down. But now we see that a lot of kids, if they're just absorbed in something, like rearranging magnets or doing a crossword puzzle, that helps decrease the tics and helps them get through with the urge as well. Being social helps a lot of kids, just playing. Being out there. On the Pinterest page, you'll see there's a whole page of hand games that you can do. So when you have an urge, going to a friend or going to a parent and saying, oh, hey, learn this new game, this new clapping hand game, and doing that instead. Mood pencils, they have these great pencils now that when you touch them, they change color. So in school, sometimes it's hard to have fidget toys because kids get distracted by them. But if you have a pencil and you feel an urge coming on, it's in your hand already. You can kind of just move your thumb on it, check out the color. You're going to be distracted for a few minutes to get through that urge, but it's not like you have a toy in your hand that's distracting you or some kind of something to pull out that's distracting you. So that's helpful. And you know, even just doing an imaginal, like imagining yourself feeling the urge that brings it on, and then imagining yourself not doing it. So working that way in that kind of imaginal into the urges as well. Technology. So lots of things about technology today that people get really worried about, but really it's a great, great motivator. Kids love it. It makes a lot of things easier. They're motivated to use it. There are apps and websites for everything. So electronics, YouTube, Google Images, apps. Again, on the Pinterest page, lots of links to things that I have used and that our clinic has used. You know, there are things like Spider Squish, where you have to actually just like either use your finger or the mouse to click on spiders to stop them and squish them, which I have to say is quite creepy. That one I hadn't used till recently, and I'm not afraid of spiders, but it's a little creepy. Noise apps, things like if people are anxious about, socially anxious that maybe they'll make a disgusting noise. There are actually noise apps that have disgusting noises, and you can set them so when it gets quiet, that noise happens. And so it gives them a chance, because everyone makes a disgusting noise sometimes. So it gives them a chance to like let that happen and see it's not so bad and get used to it and be okay with it. Any kind of perfectionism games, there's a game called Heads Up where it's timed, and you either do charades or you do, you know, verbal skills to kind of guess at things, but it's timed, and that's hard for kids who don't like to make mistakes, who need to be perfect. Waiting out urges, there are specific timers that are patience timers that like help you just wait, but there are also sort of breathing or meditation apps that can be used just to kind of give you a way to wait out that urge. Social anxiety, networking sites are great. For those, you know, you don't want the child to do anything really embarrassing on there. You know, you want to be mild in your exposures because social networking can, you know, get out of control that way, but even kids hesitate to friend someone because they're afraid to be rejected, or kids hesitate to besides friends, someone could hesitate to send a post without reading it 100 times in case there's an error. So even just having kids make an error and send it. With selective mutism and social anxiety, sound meters apps help. Again, you don't want to use it all the time, and you don't want to really focus that much on volume, but sometimes kids don't realize how quiet they're talking, and sometimes just letting them check that out, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that I wasn't really making that much noise. And so that's sometimes just helpful with education. Using any kind of conceptual and motivational clips, there's tons of them on that Pinterest site. There's lots of clips. You know, Michael Jordan does these great Nike commercials. Every child's movie is about facing fears. There's another movie called Phoebe in Wonderland. They say it's about OCD, but it looks more like complex tics to me when I'm looking at it. Amazing clips in all of those. So that is helpful. And then there are just general websites that have helpful information on them. Rewards we can flip through real quick. So, you know, some people need rewards. It's really, really, really hard work. It's hard to do. And so if you're younger, you're more likely to need a reward because you don't have the big picture. If you have an intellectual disability, you might be more likely to need a reward because, again, you're not sort of getting the big picture. Or for some kids, it's just really hard. They just need some external motivation. So don't have to be tangible. There's a lot of different things that you can do. And natural rewards are great. A lot of times for kids with social anxiety or selective mutism, I give out different either puzzle pieces or game pieces in my office. And they go around, they knock on the doors, and they say, do you have something for me? And they collect the pieces, and then the reward is we play with whatever game pieces they collected, or we create the puzzle, or we create the art project with whatever art supplies they collected. So all of those kinds of things, finding the vending machine, that's helpful for separation anxiety, it's helpful for social anxiety. Just thinking about what the natural consequences are. What are they getting back by facing this or by not doing the urge? Lots of ways to track. Be creative. You can use marbles. You can use Brave Bucks, tickets, feathers for Brave Acts. Some kids just like a plain old chart. So lots of things to do with that. And then you just need to make sure whatever reward is happening is strong enough. So a lot of times if you can make that reward exclusive to be just the reward, then it stays strong and then they're motivated by it. You want to set it up for success. It shouldn't be too hard. They should be able to, that's where your steps come in. They should be able to earn the rewards and need to be reasonable. They can't be earning an Xbox game for every time they resist an urge, so it needs to be a reasonable reward. And the delivery needs to be consistent. For younger kids, they might need immediate. For older kids, can do a token system. And there is a difference between a reward and a bribe. This is set up ahead of time. They're doing something hard, and they're earning something for their hard work, which is very different than a very quick way to get control by saying, oh, if you do this right now, I'll give you that. The other challenge, and we don't have a lot of time to go through this piece, is just logistical barriers. So even really motivated clients, it's really hard for them sometimes because this is hard work. It's hard to do things. It's hard to resist urges. It's hard to face things you're afraid of. People are really busy. It's hard to schedule in practice. A lot of times baseline stress is already really high. And there are also family dynamics to think about. So to help with some of these logistical things, technology is good here. There are great tracking apps. There are ways to set reminders. There's a way to track things. You know, you just click it on the app on the phone instead of having to find your piece of paper and write it down and all of that. You can set up all kinds of reminders. And then you also have the tracking sheet right on you. So whenever you go to talk to somebody about it, you can look at your progress. You can see what's going on. The phone is a great reminder. You can put in little cues, so a reminder might pop up that says Brave or HRT or whatever you want it to do to cue you. So if you always pull in math class and you're allowed to have a phone that vibrates that pops up and says HRT, it reminds you when you walk into math class to pull out your stuff to have in your hand to try to stop pulling, to try to resist that urge. And you can set up pop-ups at random times with any kind of tips that would help. You can get them as texts. You can get them by geolocation. So if it always happens in my living room that I'm always anxious about whatever and I need a prompt, when I walk into my living room, I can set my phone to give me a prompt. You can do just random reminders. So there's lots of ways to use it as a reminder. And there are also lots of great tracking apps. So counters, many different counters. You can track different things like I bossed back or I gave in. Or I resisted the urge versus I ticked. I resisted the urge versus I pulled. And then the quick counters, there's one on the Pinterest page that in the end what it does is it actually will create a report for the week. So it'll tally everything up for you. And you can send it to or give it to whoever you want or look at it with whoever you want to kind of think about how you're doing. Habit builders, same way, same thing in some ways, and it gives you sort of a weekly accumulative of what habits were you able to do and what habits were you able to break or change and what ones were harder for you. General stress is important because if your coffee cup is already full, you pour a little bit more in and it spills over, right? So if you're already stressed and anxious and now you have a trigger to pull or a trigger to tick, it's going to be harder to resist that because you're already up at the top. You know, same thing with OCD, anxiety. If you're already up at the top with stress and then there's a trigger and you get a 98 instead of 100, which for a lot of kids is terrible, they will fall apart because they're already up high with their stress. So this is basic stuff. Routines, good habits. They should be sleeping well. They should be moving a lot. Nighttime is a great time to kind of reconnect with parents. Snuggle together, read, whatever you can do. Playtime is a great time to reconnect with parents. Slowing down and being with each other. All of those things are really important to bring down the stress. Also, family dynamics in general, right? So a lot of times there's a lot of conflict. People are really upset about the hair loss. Parents are really upset about the hair loss or upset about the ticking, mostly out of concern because they're afraid their child's going to get teased. But there's a lot of conflict around it. Or there's a lot of conflict because if you're doing an hour of rituals in the morning, then everybody is late for work. So helping families manage to deal with some of the dysfunction and some of the worry that parents have. You know, we always say to parents, like, it's just hair. It's just a tick. You know, same thing for teachers. Like, it's not really anything to be that alarmed about. As far as, you know, it's a tick, and you're missing a little bit of hair. Now, of course, you're worried about the child and making sure the child's okay. But the more they feel that worry and the more they feel that worry attached to them wanting to stop and the conflict around it, the more they'll tick and the more they'll pull. So that's why you're going to pull that piece out for them. Divergent approaches we already kind of spoke about. You really want to be all on the same page to help the child be able to do what they need to do. Any kind of conflict in families, sometimes they're separated families. You know, sometimes there are families that are not separated but have a lot of conflict. There's divorced families. There's multi-generational families where the older generation doesn't understand. So helping families manage that conflict is important. And then parent distress and similar anxiety. So if I have OCD, my child has OCD, and they're doing an exposure homework and it's the same worry I have, it's going to be really hard for me. Same with teachers. I mean, teachers may have some anxieties or have OCD, or they may have trick, or they may have tics. So to see a child in their classroom doing those things, it's going to stir up a lot of emotions in teachers and can stir up a lot of distress in teachers. So just to kind of recognize all those pieces and put in whatever is needed to be put in to help support the whole system. So this is my last slide. I like this slide because this is a little girl that really had a lot of stuff going on with OCD. You know, the most important thing I think for parents and teachers and therapists to do is to really let the kid own it. I did not do the work. You know, they can thank me. They can, you know, be glad they got all of their stuff, their life back the way they wanted it. But I didn't do the hard work. They did the hard work. So we're the people who guide them. The teachers and the parents and the therapists are the people that guide them. Now, in that also, the parents are doing a lot of work. So I should say that as well. The parents should also own the success and really make it their own. And then that will help them to continue to manage whatever it is that comes up for them for the rest of their lives. So Voluntary, right? Kids should be on board. You can motivate them, but don't over-focus. Be neutral, and don't force. Don't do surprise exposures. Follow the child's lead in creativity. Ideas are everywhere, everywhere. NPR just did a whole show the other day on rejection therapy. A guy who was rejected by his girlfriend and went into a deep depression and decided he was going to go out and every day be rejected by like so many people, and came up with all this stuff that he could do, like go up to a stranger and ask for $100. And his only rule was he had to be rejected. And now it's online in this game format, and people are joining this online game where they're going out. Anyone who's afraid of being rejected or has social anxiety is going out and practicing being rejected, so it doesn't bother them so much. So it's everywhere. You know, the mood pencils I found at my orthodontist, my child's orthodontist. So that you just need to look for the ideas. Any kind of manualized treatment, it's a guide, you know, and you don't need to follow every single thing. You need to look at the child in front of you and the family in front of you and figure out what to do. And then that would also be true for every parent and every teacher. Even if you have in your head, like, oh, well, but this is how I need to do it, if it's not working with the child in front of you, what can you shift? So maybe it doesn't fit in that box, and maybe you have to think outside of the box. Down on the end of the slide is the resources I was telling you about. So if you go to that link, you'll see, I think there are like 40 or 50 other links on there that will take you to links about all of the things that I talked about, all the different creative ways that you can use these techniques. And then the rest of the information is just about our organization at Cottage. And that is it.
Wow, you can take your drink now maybe, huh?
I'm sorry, I know I did run over.
Good. Okay, well, we have a number of questions, and before we start, I do want to apologize. I had a little equipment malfunction a bit ago and had unmuted myself, so I apologize for that. Had a question, and this may be something that's answered in those links that you provided, but earlier on in the presentation, I had someone ask what the app's name for that change the picture into the puzzle. Is that something that's included in those links that you gave?
It is, and I think it's called Jiggity Jigsaw. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called, but it is
Okay.
in those links.
In those links. Okay, great. Can you speak about OCD behaviors that are more based on control than fear?
Yes. I mean, yes, right. So you have, and this is where tics and OCD can overlap a little bit. You have a category of OCD sort of called not just right. So something doesn't feel just right. And it's not necessarily a fear. It's just uncomfortable. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way they expect it to be. And they don't want it that way. They need it to change in order to feel comfortable. And with tics, often you see that with complex tics, right? So unless I walk up the stairs and then go back down once or twice before I go all the way up, I'm uncomfortable. So it's that same sort of not just right that leads to a discomfort. So you would treat it the same way. You know, the biggest thing I find is for people across the board to use the language the child uses. So if you automatically assume it's a fear or a worry and you're always using that language, and they're saying, well, no, I'm not afraid and I'm not worried, it just bugs me. Use bugs you. Like, what can we do to help you get used to this so it doesn't bug you so much? How can we, there was a little boy I worked with that was very young, and he came up with the idea of one way, doing it one way versus doing it 47 different ways, because he could only do it one way. So he started making a log on his own of the 47, so he would try everything that he would get stuck on. He'd say to his mom, let's do it 47 different ways. So it really helped him become more flexible. I think that, I'm hoping that answers the question.
Okay, well, we'll see if we get a follow-up question to that. Can you explain the difference between compulsive and impulsive thoughts?
Yes. So compulsive usually is, the function of a compulsion is to relieve anxiety or to make a feared consequence not come true. So it's a movement away. The function of, like when you have an impulse action based on an impulsive thought, that is more of a movement towards. Often it's something that you want to do, often it's something that you might get gratification out of. So with the trick, there's more impulsive thought. because some kids are like, oh, I really want to find that root, and this one's not big enough, I'm going to go for another one. And they're kind of impulsively then pulling because they're moving towards it because they want to find the root. Versus for something like OCD, they would have a thought that if they touched that doorknob, they would get sick. And then their compulsion would be, I need to move away from it. I'm not going to touch that doorknob. Or if I do, I need to go wash my hands.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure I get it, but that's okay. That's just me. I'm having a little trouble with that concept.
Right. I mean, it's a little tricky, and again, as you saw on that one slide I had before, they kind of can become each other, right? Something that can be was impulsive can become more compulsive, and something that was more compulsive can become more impulsive because they're kind of interconnected. You know, I guess they're both sort of impulsive in that you're having trouble not responding to whatever thought it is. But we usually think of impulse control being around something that you want to do, and compulsion being around something that you don't want to have happen or you don't want to feel.
Okay, now I get it. Okay, now I understand it better with that explanation. Thank you.
Sure.
How could school personnel, parents, and therapists work together to really best help a child with these disorders? What needs to happen to have that work?
So the best thing is great communication and great collaboration. Now that also comes with the biggest challenge because you're talking a lot of schedules, a lot of people, a lot of time, and depending on, you know, fee-for-service pieces, a lot of financial commitment for parents to have that kind of collaboration. But if people are talking and if there's one cohesive plan and people can tweak that plan, a lot of times when I'm talking to the school, the child and I will come up with something that they can do at school for exposures or around tics or tricks with the trying to use the competing responses, and I'll run it by a teacher and they'll say, oh, that is never going to work in my classroom, which is good to know because if it's not going to work in that teacher's classroom, it's not a good plan. And so you're just setting the child up for failure because you're giving them something that's not going to work in that classroom. So, you know, I think for therapists working collaboratively with teachers that way to make sure that the plan carryover is helpful. I think also the disconnect sometimes between parents and teachers where I see the conflict come in there around communication is sometimes there's an assumption that parents are accommodating too much or parents aren't trying hard enough, and if they would just discipline their child, they would be fine. And I think that's very hard for parents because often they are really trying, their lives are in like a state of upheaval. You know, there's lots of conflict, there's lots of distress, there's lots of crying, sometimes there's aggression, and it's really hard. It's not just about discipline, it's really about helping this child develop the skill and use strategies, and that takes some time. So I think for the teachers to understand that piece is helpful. I also think for the parents to kind of see where the teachers can be helpful. Like maybe there are some places where the teachers are like, okay, maybe we can try to urge them to move a little bit on this. How can we do that together? And for the parent to kind of join with them to say, okay, how can we make this all work? You know, instead of sending home 7 copies of a worksheet because they might make a mistake, maybe we can send home 4 this week and see how the child does with that. But again, the child's part of that conversation as well. So
okay.
I think just kind of that piece, just pulling together and collaborating.
All right, thank you. I have a follow-up question that I would like to go back to from the same individual that asked about OCD based on control rather than fear. And it has to do with this individual is apparently a clinician. And he said that the OCD behaviors involve this student's mother needing her to open the door or move chairs or do something that he does when he's in school. So he's attempting to, so the question is this an attempt to control the mom for some reason? Is that something you would care to comment on at all?
If it's OCD, it is funny about where it matters. So it can be very different. It's not necessarily around control. It's more around anxiety. So at home, a child might be more anxious. At school, a child might be more anxious touching things. But when all right, so let me think about how to say this. So there's a lot of sort of carryover, right? So when you're at home, especially before you have treatment, a lot of times that avoidance and that accommodation, moving a chair, opening the door, it lets you live your life because you can't get out the door because your child is melting down for 2 hours because they won't open the door. So you're just opening the door with them. And then this is where sometimes you get this habitual thing in. So now you've got this sort of relationship with your parents. You got to get through your day. They've been accommodating to get through the day. And it's just sort of now for your mom to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that for you. It's extra, extra hard. Where you walk into a school, a lot of kids also kind of have like a different expectation. They feel a different expectation from the teachers because the teachers have them for a shorter period of time. There's sort of more of a broader help system. Like if something goes wrong, you can get the guidance counselor, you can get the principal. There are different people that you may be able to count on within that system that are consistently there. And the child also has their own sense of, okay, I need to really behave for this teacher. I need to do what this teacher has asked me to do. And then you also don't have the history of accommodation. So I would say it's less about control and more about history of accommodation, as well as children on purpose holding it together at school. I have a lot of kids that come in here and say, you know what, I can do these at school because otherwise kids will laugh at me. So I'm motivated to do them. So I go ahead and touch things. But when I get home, I take a 2-hour shower. So they may be doing the ritual at home, you know, and a lot of kids are really not doing the rituals at school in front of the parents and the other kids because they don't want to be teased or they just know what's expected from them in that situation.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. We've run long here. I'm going to maybe try and get one more question in. Why is it important for the exposure and habit reversal treatment to be done voluntarily?
So it's important for lots of reasons. With the habit reversal therapy, the more focus that other people have on the picking and the pulling without the child being on board typically does two things. One is it usually exacerbates the issue. So usually they start pulling and having more tics in that case. The other piece is secondary-wise, they start feeling badly about themselves. And so you see some kids start to feel depressed because they feel like they can't control this, but everybody else is focusing on it. And everybody else is trying to get them to do things they can't do because they can't stop these urges and they can't stop this pulling. And now they feel really badly about themselves. So with tics and trick, that's sort of the component of why you want it to be voluntary for them. Because otherwise there's just a lot of conflict and pressure around something they don't feel like they can control. And it just makes them feel bad about themselves, and that extra stress actually makes them tick and pull more as well. Also, I think with tics, a lot of times you're triggered by just thinking about them. So as soon as I start talking to kids about their tics, they start ticking. And so if I walk into a room and I know this person's going to expect me not to tick, I'm probably going to start doing it. So that also exacerbates it in that way. But if I'm on board, that kind of pulls all that pressure away, and then I have you as a support. For anxiety and for OCD, if you do an exposure without a child being part of the planning and part of, you know, saying, okay, I'm ready to do this, the biggest thing is that you sort of break this trust that they can trust you and in this moving forward and doing this exposure work, right? So if kids are moving forward at a slow pace, but they're moving forward and they're doing the exposure work, and then someone tricks them into doing something they think they can handle, what that child does is now every time he has to complete a therapy homework where he has to do an exposure, he's always waiting for someone to trick him. And now he's less likely to want to do those exposures. So it sort of, it definitely breaks that trust and makes them not feel like it's understood as well. And it doesn't help. I mean, a lot of times if a child is forced to do exposures, they will do them, but they will make up for it in some way. Like they will ritualize a lot later, or as soon as someone's not making them do that certain thing in that certain way, they'll stop doing it and go right back to doing the rituals they were doing.
All right. Doctor, thank you very much. I think we're going to end it here. I'm going to turn this back over to Kelly for her to do her wrap-up. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us on the webinar, Creative Applications of Exposure Therapy and Habit Reversal Therapy. There is an exit survey which we need everyone attending to fill out. If it doesn't show up tonight, it will get another one tomorrow. The webinar blog is now open and available for the next 7 days on the NJCTS website for any additional questions that were not covered in tonight's presentation. That website is www.njcts.org. Also, an archived recording of tonight's webinar will be posted to the website. Our next presentation, Making Sense of Sensory Issues, How to Manage Heightened Senses at Home and in the Classroom, will be presented by Dr. Michelle Miller and is scheduled for February 25th, 2015. This ends tonight's webinar. Thank you, Dr. McGovern, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for attending. Good night.